And because he harboured that resentment, eventually he lost his wife. She drove him away. She drove other people away. Now, there's no question that Jesse was wrong and Jim was right. But his minister told him to forgive and to move on, but he wouldn't. And finally he died a lonely death. But in many respects he had died long years before because of resentment. He allowed his life to be ruined by resentment. Forgiveness is not only the healthy option, it's also the happy option. Forgiveness frees the one who has been hurt. Forgiveness is the road to healing and happiness. It gives us the freedom to live. Now that doesn't make it easy. And it's not easy. But Jesus did say it was necessary, and it is the healthy, happy option. Because the alternative is resentment. And the word resentment quite literally means to feel again. Resentment means clinging to the past. It means reliving, replaying those hurts all over again. Resentment is like picking off fresh scabs and never allowing the wound to heal. And a resentful attitude is like acid. It corrodes all the relationships of that individual, and it eats away at the person himself or herself. An example of that is Sonia Tolstoy, the wife of the celebrated Russian author Leo Tolstoy. When they got engaged to be married, Leo wanted to start with a clean slate. He wanted everything to be open and honest with his fiancée, with his wife-to-be. And so he gave Sonia his diaries and asked her to read his diaries, which contain some detailed descriptions of the previous relationships that he had had. Now, he did it with good intentions, but it was a terrible mistake. Because it sowed the seeds for a very unhappy marriage. Now, Sonia was prepared to forgive him for some of his youthful flings. But there was one affair that she could never forgive him for. And that was his relationship with Xenia, a peasant woman who lived on the Tolstoy family estate. In her diary, the date January 14, 1909, Sonia Tolstoy wrote this: "He relishes that peasant lady with her strong female body and her sunburned legs. She tempts him just as powerfully now as she did all those years ago." Now, what age do you think Xenia was when Sonia Tolstoy wrote these words? Was she a woman in the flower of womanhood, in her late 30s, early 40s perhaps? Was she a mature woman in her 50s? No. When Sonia Tolstoy wrote these words, Xenia was a shriveled, crumpled up old lady of over 80 years of age. And yet she had allowed that bitterness, that anger, that resentment to poison her for over 50 years. And it ruined her marriage. That's what resentment does. That's what the failure to forgive can do. Contrast that with another woman. For me, one of the heroes of the long years of civil unrest in Northern Ireland. A lady called Noreen Hill. Just over 20 years ago, the people of Enniskillen, a town about 120 kilometres west of Belfast, the capital city, gathered on Remembrance Sunday to remember the dead of 2 world wars and other conflicts. It's the equivalent of Anzac Day here. It was a dull, drab November morning, so typical of that time of year. And so the people gathered, waiting for 11 o'clock when the service would begin. but the service never took place. For a couple of minutes before 11 o'clock, a bomb planted by the IRA went off without warning. And when the dust had settled, 11 people lay dead amongst the debris, and over 60 were injured. Amongst the injured was a man called Ronnie Hill. He was the principal of the local high school. He was left in a coma. In actual fact, he never recovered consciousness. He spent the next 13 years on a hospital bed in a coma. And his wife, Noreen, maintained a vigil at his bedside for all of those years. And when she was asked what she felt about the people who had done this to her husband, she said, "I have forgiven them. I can do nothing else when I remember the words of Jesus on the cross, 'Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do.'" Here was a woman who was chained by her love for her husband to his hospital bed for over 13 years, but she was free. She was free from resentment. She was free from bitterness. In actual fact, she died a few months ago. But she died a woman who was happy and healthy and free from bitterness because she forgave. Forgiveness is the healthy option, the happy option. And that's the question that we have to ask ourselves. The disappointments, the setbacks, the hurts of life, are we going to allow them to make us bitter or better? Are we going to hold on to those hurts so that they become hates, or are we going to let them go? Another commentator put it so well: the first and often the only person to be healed by forgiveness is the person who does the forgiving. When we genuinely forgive, we set a prisoner free, and then discover that the prisoner we set free was us. Why forgive? The philosophy of forgiveness, the words and example of Jesus give us no other option. Why forgive? Because it's the healthy option. It's the happy option. Why forgive? We come to the practice of forgiveness. Forgiveness has a very practical benefit. Forgiveness is the only thing that can break the cycle of blame and pain. The only thing. Science was not one of my favourite subjects at school. I had to do physics to the equivalent of year 10, and I hated it. I did not enjoy it. And one of the few things that I can remember from physics is Newton's laws of motion. And even then, I can only remember the third one. And the third law of motion goes something like this: that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Now, I can't explain it, but anyway, I do remember the law. When unforgiveness reigns, a Newton-like law goes into operation, and it goes something like this: for every insult and hurt, there is an equal and opposite insult and hurt. For every act of aggression, there is an equal and opposite act of retaliation. For every atrocity, there is an equal and opposite outrage.